going. Hi, I'm Meta Spencer, and today we're going to go to Yemen. Only thank goodness we don't actually have to go to Yemen because it's not a very nice place to be. And we really have to worry a lot about that. The poor guys actually living in Yemen are having a wretched time with war and famine and disease and ugh. But we have some nice people who know a lot about the issue. And I think we need to, when we talk about Yemen and the things going on there today, we really need to consider the neighbors of Yemen because it's in a conflict in a zone that is just very conflict ridden. And of course, the Saudis are not helping matters. And there's even a complaint that the Canadian government has provided or is selling equipment to the Saudis to carry out atrocities in some cases against the Yemen population or some of the people in Yemen. That's a controversial topic that may come up or may not. But we certainly do want to talk about the zone, the Middle East countries around Yemen, and the dynamics of the relationships among those countries, probably also, especially Iran. So I have two people with me today who have different angles of information about this kind of thing. Paul Mallet is a retired colonel in the Canadian military, and he also he's not only an ex-military man, but a very enthusiastic peace builder. And so I turn to him quite often when I want advice about how to create peace in the world. And Paul has an organization called something like the Paul Mallet Center for Peace and what? Paul, what is the rest of the term?
Ethics and Peace Services.
Ethics and Peace Services. Mm-hmm. You know, that's a very impressive name. Thank you. All right. And Paul is here with me at he's not here at all. He's at his home in Ottawa. And we have one of his friends, Akbar Manusi, who is a professor at the Carleton University School of Business Management and Business. He is from Iran, and he goes to Iran every year. Maybe not this year because of the pandemic, but normally he travels around Iran and he's very familiar with it. We just started talking about the problem that Iran is facing with COVID right now, and he's apparently one of the things he's doing is trying to find COVID vaccine for Iran. Good thing. So welcome to both of you. Paul, why don't you start things off? You and I had a conversation about a year ago, I think, when the Yemen war was certainly not looking good. But maybe you can bring us up to date about what has been going on in the region.
The future of Yemen and the past of Yemen is really entangled with a larger picture. And I think it's that larger picture that we have to understand, because we certainly understand the smaller picture right now of the suffering that's going on, the issue of a failed state, and the issue of very, very dim prospects. And I think there's been a major change in the Middle East in the last couple of decades, which I think we have to sort of be cognizant of. Clausewitz, who was a military strategist in a sense, postulated that war is simply the continuation of politics by other means. Mm-hmm. And I think that has a big context here. But I think it is changed. I think we all require the dictum of, for example, that Afghanistan is the graveyard of empires, in which whole succeeding waves of either big powers or invaders have really come to a lot of ruin and grief as a result of these sorts of things. So I think warfare is now becoming the graveyard of empires. All the big powers that are being involved in the Yemen situation or the Afghan situation or the Iraqi situation. And we're not in a traditional warfare where you get all of a sudden there's an ending somehow. There's some sort of armistice or peace agreement, some reconciliation, some reintegration back into the world economies, and then we have peace. This doesn't seem to be the case anymore. The case seems to be is that these wars are intractable, and they can become endless, and they become generational. So we have a different context going on here. Warfare is becoming a graveyard of empires in the Middle East, in the sense that the ruinous costs, these trillion-dollar costs that big power protagonists in the wars have to endure, and blood and treasure and suffering. So we're now facing a different context even of what war is, and we have to look at that in some situation. What initially may start out as a war in a national situation can very quickly, through various proxies of Russia and the US and Israel and Iran and Saudi Arabia, get right out of hand. It sort of metastasizes conflict. And not only that, it takes metastasizes whole economies, that are often become fueled by government corruption and various other players. So when you start giving weapons to everybody, you don't get weapons back. And as a result, you are simply fueling intergenerational wars.
I'd like to ask Akbar Manusi, because of the fact you really know Iran very well, could you situate this in the context of the dispute? I think it's mainly between Iran and Saudi Arabia, but they're all the neighboring countries seem to line up one way or another on this thing. How is it that Yemen becomes a political football or a pawn in the game between Iran and Saudi Arabia?
Thank you very much for inviting me to begin with. Yemen is an important strategically, economically, because of the port of Aden is a very important port. Almost 11% of the petroleum from the Persian Gulf goes through that area to go to the Suez Canal and so forth. So whoever holds power on is very important for both Saudi Arabia and, of course, for Iran and the rest of the community. As you know, when this war started in 2014, late in 2014, it's one of the, I think after Iran-Iraq war, which took about 8 years, it's almost 7 years that this conflict goes on. And there are a lot of people involved in it. It's not just the Saudi Arabia, there is the coalition that they have built it. US provides strategic and intelligence support. And then we have NATO involved in it. We have France involved in it. There's a number of countries, the United Arab Emirates, the Egyptians. There are so many in either side. From the Houthi, of course, these Houthi, which are part of the closer to Shia Islamic ideology, they're more aligned to Iranian, of course, and therefore Hezbollah at some point and other militia help, and of course Iran not directly involved in conflict, but of course they have not hidden that they are supporting Houthi.
I've had a hard time understanding exactly who the Houthi are. And the question that I've heard is some people treat them as if they are really pawn or directed by Iran. They're completely under the control of Iran, or they're totally loyal to Iran, something like that. Who are they? Is this a tribe, an ethnic population, or an armed force, or what kind of entity are the Houthi?
Oh, they're part of what is called Zaydi's Shia Islamic School of Thought. They actually were governing Yemen for thousands of years. It was only in 1962 or 69, I suppose, that obviously they changed the power of the Sunnis took power of that one. Of course, the Sunnis are the majority there. But as I said—
Sorry, the Sunnis are the majority in Yemen.
Of course, they are. There are 75% are Sunni, 25% of them are Houthi. And the Sunnis
now,
also—
let me work on this because I'm still confused. Now, the Houthi, that's not a religious sect and it's not a military entity, but it's a Shia-oriented group. Are all the Shia in Yemen allied with the Houthi, or are there differences?
Well, as I said it before, they're part of what's called Zaidi's school of thought of Shiism. Okay, they're not the same as Iran Shia, but they are part of the same field, the same area, and they've been in, as I said it before, for many thousands of years. They were in charge of running the government, so-called the government of Yemen.
So
And
now would you, I'm still playing, pardon me for digging at this, because I've looked at it 2 or 3 times and I still back away from it, not sure what I'm talking about. They are more like a sect or a denomination within Shia.
branch of Shiism, a branch of Shiism, a branch of Shiism, and it's called Zaidi. Zaidi, Zaydi, Zaidi Shia School of Thought. Okay, so Iranian, on the other hand, are Shia, but there are 12 imamates, well, called Isna Ashari. So we have different sect of Shiism as it is different sect of Sunnis. Even the Sunnis in Yemen, they are also part of what is called. They are also part of a different, it's called Shafi'i school of Sunnis. So it looks like that. This in the Sunnis school of thought and Shiism also there are branches, okay, different so-called branches of the same tree, and so the Houthi are more aligned to Iranian school of thought of Shiism, even though it's not exactly the same thing, and the Sunnis also belongs to the Shafi'i, which is another school of thought of Sunnis. So it looks like that. Obviously, Saudi Arabia are more supporting the Sunni part, and Iranians are supporting the Shia part of their own branches. So that's as simple as it is. Even though,
well, but now here you have what you're describing could sound closer to being like an academic discipline with different, Marxism versus neoliberalism or something, where you have different schools of thought. But that's clearly it's much more than a theoretical dispute over some principles. Clearly this is a war. Now are all of these different sects or schools of thought within Islam antipathetic toward each other, or are there some of them, why is there a fight going on between schools of thought about religious doctrine?
It's not the fight within the religion. It's a politics of religion, mostly. It's a domination of power in the Middle East. The two so-called real power in the Middle East is Saudi Arabia and Iran. These are the biggest of power. I can give you even in terms of militaristic, I can break down, who has what and how strong they are. Iranian are strong in military, in missiles and manpower and everything else, and Saudi also have a domination. However, both countries also very rich in terms of resources. Oil is a prime export of their country. So obviously Saudis are in very shape because of the support of the West, and Iranian are under sanctions right now because of their position against the West. So it's this pro-cons type of thing. So Yemen it's a proxy war basically between Saudi Arabia and Iran. It says under religion. Obviously, if you are Shia, you support the Shia. There are Shia in Lebanon, Hezbollah, for example. Obviously, Iran will support them. That's not hidden. But then the Sunnis also, for example, when there was coalition of the Saudis, all countries in the Persian Gulf, I can name it. You cannot believe it. There are so many countries. At least 15 countries joined Saudi Arabia, and there was a lot of damages. There are almost United Nations actually believes that there are more than 13 million people are going to starve. And starvation is a bad thing. And there are a lot of bombarding of the Houthi position. Many people have died. So it's religion is the tip of the ice. Is just the tip of the ice. The rest of that is the politics of Middle East itself.
Yeah. Okay. Let me see if could you compare it to, say, Ireland, Northern Ireland, the politics of Protestantism versus Catholicism, where they're not really fighting over religious doctrine. They're fighting over group identities, two groups in opposition to each other. But the marker of the differences between them is what church they belong to. Now, is that sort of the way it is when we're talking about the fights among these different Islamic communities?
Ireland wanted their independence, as you know. They wanted to have their own independence, and they fought for that one. So it's Houthi. If Houthi have been running this Yemen, I mean, for thousands of years, they were forming the government. Now, suddenly in 1962, there was a change of government. The Sunnis came in power, and the Sunni were majority, and obviously they somehow the right of Houthi was not there, and then become a political movement and armed forces, basically armed movement, rather than religious movement. It's an armed movement, including a little spice of religion in it too.
Okay, so now did this war, this particular branch of the war, or phase of the war, which I gather the conflict's been going on a long time, but the current one, was it started by the Houthis taking some military initiative, or was it started by outsiders?
Well, of course, when the Houthi realized that there are minorities, and they were not given position in the government or participation, or being basically forgotten, they took their arms, and they were good fighters, and they in no time they took over Aden, which is the capital of Yemen, and northern part of these. So they still have the territories under their command. And yes, when you feel that you have been forgotten, you have more desire to fight than when you are in the seat of the throne. So these people have more reason to fight, and it's their own life, their own existence. So yes, the President Ali then was ousted and went to Saudi Arabia, and there was a lot of problems came for the Sunnis in that they lost the capital. Basically, you lose the capital, you lose the main source of power. Everyone was in it from the Saudi parts. Some countries, of course, they stopped helping because they lost a lot and they've been gaining things. Egypt, for example, said enough is enough. United Arab Emirates says enough, but they still. And now we have a new administration in USA. And when both houses in the Trump times, they passed a resolution that we should support the Saudis, Trump vetoed that and says no. But now Mr. Biden is in the office, and he's very hard on Saudis, and he basically wants to stop that supporting, at least the support. But the war is not ended yet. Not even the Saudis have lost at least 500 and more than maybe 85,000 injured. Plus the damages to their vital revenue, which is the refineries. Twice the refineries has been struck by Houthi, and we're talking about almost half of that refinery, which is 5% of the global oil, has been stopped because of damages. So the damages to Saudis is not inhuman, but it's mostly in the capital.
This war began about 8 years ago, something like that. Okay. And the war began with the Houthis attacking the Sunni government in Aden, is it?
Well, they actually, most Houthi lives in mountain area in the higher land.
Okay.
And so it was actually really looking back, it was Iran and Saudi Arabia. Iran and Saudi Arabia looking for their main interest. And remember that the lifeline of global oil goes from Strait of Hormuz, which is in Persian Gulf, but also the Aden's port is in case that something, which is all these so-called ships that supposedly bring the oils to the West, they have to go to Aden's and they go to Suez Canal and so forth. So who owns the port of Aden was very, very important. If Saudi were able to control the ports of Aden. Therefore, they can control the lifeline of the oil shipment to the West, and Iranian would have been in disadvantages. So it's all economical.
Okay, so this was not really just starting by the Houthis trying to regain their old position of control of the country. It was they already were in cahoots with Iran or the two sides were in cahoots with Iran and the Saudi Arabia. So from the get-go in 2014, this was really outside countries starting the whole thing. Is that fair?
Well, one side it supported the government of Sunnis who were in power at that time, which is Saudi Arabia. The other one, of course, and of course, when I'm talking to the other one, it's including Iran and other parties involved in Hezbollah and some of those in Iraqis, and even North Korea. North Korea, put it this way, it's far away from. You never heard of that one. Well, they were supporting because they were supporting Iran. They were hating, they're also where they, but not in terms of manpower, in terms of logistic. That's something new, maybe. But yes, so the Houthis were in disadvantage, and they said, "Oh, here's opportunity. We are getting some support," and therefore the war started to begin with in late in 2014, and in no time the coalition formed, and the coalition is about 14, 15 countries. 15 countries in Arab states. They're part of the Saudi Arabia, and they started bombing and everything else. And France even got involved in United Kingdom, the NATO itself. Here, Paul knows about NATO's and everything else, can ask him. But they were also involved, and they were mostly, and some of the countries, neighboring countries that were Sunnis, were all in the camp of Saudi Arabia. So imagine that
France and all of even European countries are lined up with Saudis. I just find that so weird because 90% of what we read about the Saudis is what a horrible gang they are. At least the government of the country. It's kind of hard to find any rationale for supporting them unless you just say, well, maybe they're bad, but maybe the Iranians are worse or something. I don't know. But I don't know why any outside country would be supporting the Saudis unless it was a matter of they have the oil that we want. Is that it?
The oil is very important. I'm sure that we cannot. This so-called Saudi-led coalition was United Arab Emirates, was Senegal, was Sudan, was Morocco, was Qatar, Turkey, Bahrain, Egypt, Jordan, France, Mauritania, USA, United Kingdom, Italy, NATO, Spain, Somalia, Kuwait, and even people Mujahideen, which was Iranian, but opposing Iranian. So, just to name a few. How many countries I named? Many countries. Many countries. I'm talking about, not one. I'm saying United Kingdom, NATO, Italy, Spain, Somalia, Kuwait, Bahrain, Sudan, Morocco, those many countries.
Hey, now, if you ask the leaders of these countries, why do you support the Saudis? What would they say? I mean, I haven't heard any justification even proposed for why they would take sides one way or another.
Well, oil.
Okay, so it's that simple.
Simple, one word, oil. And
Yemen doesn't have any oil, and why is it? I mean, Iran does. So is it because Saudis have more oil, a lot more oil than Iran, and you just couldn't do without what they have?
No, the Iranians were on sanctions, and they will not be able to export the oil as much. Okay, they were on sanctions because couldn't buy it from them. So most of the oil was coming from Saudi Arabia, and they were a rich country too. They had a lot of money, and they were selling and also at the process of that, the sales of arms from all these countries I mentioned, countries started to shift towards Saudi Arabia, Kuwait, United Arab Emirates, Bahrain, Dubai, just name it. All those countries wanted sophisticated weaponry to fight. So they provide in their fight, and in exchange, they get the oil.
But a lot of the support was logistical. I mean, you can even ask the same question about Canada. Look at the great big contracts that are going on with regards to armored fighting vehicles and
That's
the
right.
various reciprocal arrangements. I mean, this is there's a lot of money involved in all of this kind of thing.
By
And
the way, Paul,
unfortunately,
is that even over? I mean, this has been going on 5 years or so where people have been shaming the Canadian government. Most of the population of Canada wants to say we shouldn't be selling stuff like that to the Saudis. But yet Canada, as far as I know, they still do it. And has there been any change in that at all? I haven't seen any evidence.
I think the contract is still ongoing. But the thing is, when you're a country like Saudi Arabia and you want to fight this war, it's an extremely high-tech war, and it's extremely expensive. I mean, these bombs that they drop and these missiles and operating all of these very, very modern aircraft. I mean, a lot of the countries that Akbar listed, are in the business of providing fighter jet aircraft, support, bombs, all of these sorts of things, and not necessarily putting troops on the ground or anything like that.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, the United States has had a very history of drone operations in Yemen, and all of this stuff comes at very, very high cost. And this is very lucrative for Western nations. Even though Saudi Arabia does control of all of oil, it controls a mountain of money, billions and billions and billions, and has militarized itself to the point where these high-tech systems, you become very addicted to them. In other words, you can turn a lot of these systems off just by squeezing the spare parts, for example. These fighter aircraft and these fancy missiles, these cost a lot of money. And you were essentially fighting an opposition that was equipped with small arms and really running a low-cost war, maybe tanks and things like this. And then as the war escalates, I mean, I was very surprised when Yemen decided to, or had a capacity, or at least an arrangement to use missiles on Saudi airports and oil refineries and things like this. This is not the weaponry that one usually associates with insurgency. And
well, where did they get it, and who paid for it?
Well, wherever they got it, whether they got it for Iran or whether it was operated by whoever sold them the weapons, it could have been a variety of places, and then probably that story is still to come out. But
well, you should be able. Somebody should be able to figure it out by looking at the shrapnel and saying, where'd that stuff come from?
Well, I think they have, and I think that there are Iranian weapons involved there. But if you want to look at the shrapnel that's end to end in Yemen, a lot of them have American markings on them.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
A lot. So you're in that situation, and you're in that geopolitical tension that's happening in the Middle East.
The worst is, the people, as I understand it, there's been either famine or close to it. And then, of course, whenever you have a famine or food shortage, it goes along with or brings cholera and all kinds of other diseases. So you have epidemics and a horrible health situation. So the people, I have heard that, people say this is the worst humanitarian disaster going on in the world today. I've heard it stated a number of times, but we don't see, at least I don't see, very many photos or direct reports from Yemen, from Western journalists. Maybe I'm just not looking in the right place. But is there sufficient coverage? If not, why not? And what if there were coverage? What would we be seeing that would maybe touch our hearts and make us feel ashamed of supplying the weapons that create this problem?
Well, we are seeing a tragic situation unfolding in Yemen, but we've seen it before. There's a trend in the last couple of decades. You look at three countries. You look at Yemen, for example, Syria, and Libya. I mean, these three countries have all been subjected in some way, shape, or form by big power military operations.
Mhm.
And what is the outcome of this? I mean, can anybody in their wildest dreams imagine any of these countries being whole again? I mean, they are fragmented. They have various warring groups going on in all of these countries. The suffering is unimaginable. And you look at the bigger picture also saying that, sure, conflict is going to cause something, but it fuels the three biggest crises of the planet. And, the crises, of course, are health and pandemics and cholera. And the other one is just the environmental degradation and ruin that's going on. And then the third one is these conflicts, which threaten to become generational. I mean, I can't see a solution to those three countries. And what happens is it's not only ruinous to these countries, it's ruinous to the big powers. I mean, you're into $1 trillion wars here to run these kind of high weaponry systems. I believe Iran and Iraq and Afghanistan have cost the Americans $4 to $5 trillion, or possibly even more, hundreds of thousands of lives. So there's something very, very, very wrong with how we look at conflict that has to change from traditional ways of looking at conflict. I mean, what defines strategy? I mean, when you give a military guy a tank, all his problems are tank targets. You give, and that's how they're approaching. That's how they approach conflict. They respond to it by the tools that they have and the capacities in the military force, knowing full well you cannot kill your way out of these problems. You can't have a strategy that relies on defeating an enemy and does not rely on building a shared sort of future existence between the various parties. So we take sides. U.S. takes sides, Iran takes sides, everyone takes sides, Russia, China, and the result is an unmitigated disaster. Because military strategy becomes performance oriented. In other words, here's the enemy, kill the enemy.
He's quite right. What he says is perfectly right. And I think the amount of money that has been put in this so-called wars in Afghanistan, Iraq, in Syria and Libya, if you put the amount of money, and this money have been invested in welfare of the people in those countries and have been invested in economical things, imagine what would have resulted today. And what do we have today? And this is called the economy of the war. The economy of war is based on shipment of the military weaponry. It's based on basically economics of war is one of the worst war because when they're selling $400 billion of arms to Saudi Arabia here or there, in this machinery, things they are doing fine. This is profitability, this is capitalism, this is all of that. But in the end of the day, everybody loses. Everybody is losing in this game. It's not only one winner. Even the winners are the losers. The winners also are the losers. Look at in Afghanistan, after 30 years, now America wants to get out. Question number one, what did you gain out of that 30 years?
Not a darn thing. So I can tell they're just exactly where they were at the beginning, right?
Once they move out of that, the Taliban are going to take over. And it goes back to where it was 30 years ago when the conflict, before the Zahir Shah, there was many changes in Afghanistan, but the last one was the king was called Zahir Shah. And he was good. The people was peaceful, the country was fine. I mean, yes, they were underdeveloped, they were not sophisticated, they were not all of that right. But what happened? Not only that damaged Afghanistan, it damaged also the Pakistan. The Pakistan actually was involved in all that kind of things, one way or the other. I remember that, when the war started, everybody says, okay, we're going to take over, but taking over what? What resources? What can you do? What? Now, Chinese, on the other hand, Chinese are playing very smart here. The West goes through the Persian Gulf, through the navies and ships and all these sophisticated submarines, but the Chinese go through the land. They go through the land. They go Silk Road. They go slowly. Look at the Chinese in every Western countries, including Canada, including USA, including even out of Europe. There's a Chinatown, and that's the power of China. And they are everywhere. And look at this. Where we have a American town, We don't have American, we don't have Russian town, we don't have Italian. Yes, we have some Italian, but it's only restaurants and food and all that here. Chinatown is a political center of power of China. Now the Chinese are approaching Iranian. This is a new development to have a 25 years agreement with Iranian, and the idea is to get to the Persian Gulf. They want to go to the Persian Gulf, and now they have a Silk Road built already. So they are ready and they're ready to go, and they're making a big business out there. So I think that the upcoming power now is Russia. Americans are getting out. They got to get out. They are stopping supporting Saudi Arabia in Yemen war. Biden just doesn't want to do it anymore. It's very expensive. Doesn't want to do it. Now, Russians really don't have the logistic as much. They love to come, but they don't have the resources economically. Russians have both the military part, and they have the manpower part, and they have the super economy that goes very well. From their perspective, of course, if I were a Chinese, I would have been very proud. But when you look at the other part, wherever they go, they take over. They take over in Africa. They go and give them money, funds, everything else, and when they're not able to pay the payment back or give the interest back, they take over. This is happening very rich. Paul knows about that very well too. So I think that you have to watch Chinese now. Really, a new power.
Okay, so you're thinking of some sort of alliance between Iran and China.
So
that has some bearing on the current situation in Yemen, or are you looking for that to become an important factor, but it isn't yet?
Well, Iran needs a country to protect. And of course, they are losing hope to the West, the European. And this 5+1 agreement that they have with the US and European, it didn't help them. Iran economically is not in a great shape, but militarily they are very strong. That's a very odd part of it.
Well, yes, now, but you pointed something that I hadn't seen or I hadn't heard anybody say anything about before, an alliance between Iran and China. That is news to me. Is this a really developed thing, or is it just somebody's goal or fantasy? To what extent have they really developed a relationship?
Oh, remember that now China is exporting to Iran close to $16 billion a year. $16 billion a year, which is significant. Now, that's number one. Number two.
What are they exporting? I'm sorry, China is exporting $16 billion a year of what to Iran? What is, and Iran must be sending them oil, right? Or not?
All kinds of everything, every consumer goods, basically, consumer goods all together. That's 2015, and that was where they had cooperation, which is known as 25 years agreement with Iran and China to build Iran, infrastructure in Iran, railroad, roads, trains, and all that, but also providing $400 billion of loans to Iran or assistance to Iran for the next 25 years. And that's probably significant. However, Iran was just recently came out after some oil magazine in Europe, in England, published the so-called agreement, cooperation agreement. And therefore, Iran now is coming out and say, yes, we will have an agreement. Now, there are some resistance from Iranians against this cooperation, but Iran basically has no other choice. What else can he do? He doesn't get any help. It's a sanction.
Sanctions, yeah. Oh, okay. The sanctions are, but now if they do this JPCOA again, revive it, whatever, won't that eliminate most of the sanctions and therefore reduce their dependence on China, or not?
Well, they're saying that if this agreement goes in effect, now remember that the Chinese bank now are saying that any trades with Iran, any investment in Iran, anything that we have to do is not using the US dollar, but it's going to be the Chinese currencies. which is really, America can do nothing about it. I mean, it's a Chinese currency that's going to be used, so they buy and sell and whatever they're doing. And so now the question, if China really is able to do that, that's the question. The big question is this, because China also exporting $550 billion of export to the United States. That's a big, big, big export. Now, are they sacrificing $550 billion of their export for $16 billion of export to Iran? Are they really going to? And I think that American administration in time of Trump and today are very hard on Chinese, extremely hard on Chinese. And the time is not even good for China because of this, 2 years ago, that was a different story. Today, everything is towards China because of this corona problems. Everybody thinks that if you lose somebody, you look at the Chinese and say, you guys did it.
What's interesting to me is I've been thinking about the U.S. Seems trying to get out of the Middle East, saying, this is a morass. We can't solve the Middle East, and we need to focus on China. As if now, well, let's put the Middle East aside and let them solve their own problems. Go worry about China. But now, what you've just shown, if you're right, is that there's a real intimate connection between the Middle Eastern problems and the conflict with China. That you can't separate them that easily. Are you really? I don't know. I haven't thought about that before. Is that true?
But Chinese, they're wealthy, they have the money, they have funds, even though they have the ideology behind it, but it's still the economic issues is the most important part of it. There are also the American interests globally right now in terms of business, economics, and politics too. So therefore, Chinese think that, if you cannot come through the door, go through the window, and the window is Iran.
Okay.
Now, Pop also knows about this stuff. So
when the window is also economics and not
Exactly.
necessarily military. I think a lot of this militarization is awful lot of window dressing here. When you look at the opposition, if they decided to get into some military adventures,
Sri Lanka, is that Sri Lanka you mentioned that the Chinese were there, or in Philippines, or in Indonesia, in Malaysia, and all that? You know about those things, don't you?
Well, in Sri Lanka, because a lot of the world ocean traffic goes around Sri Lanka and the Indo-Pacific. These are huge players going on. Sri Lanka is caught in the middle. It had Pompeo come and visit, and the Chinese have big contracts there, and I believe they're struggling to try to find some level of impartiality so that they can try to coexist between these two elephants that they're in bed with, and this is a lot of the whole problem is we tend to take sides. People don't tend to be impartial, and once you're on one side or the other, all of that baggage accrues, and that's part of the problem, and.
I don't see how you can do anything except to have somebody with some very big vision to try to surmount that and reduce the importance of these conflicts, to draw attention to the fact that if we just spend this money on doing health care or education share or rebuilding the country, that we'd be way ahead. Nobody seems to have that kind of vision.
Well, you're right. I mean, this all rests in the global community, the global family, and we have the United Nations, which is essentially a collegial organization. It's not hierarchical, and it does have the Security Council. But I think one of the things is there has to be a paradigm shift in thinking. And that's why I started with Clausewitz. War is the extension of politics. That has to be refuted. War has got to be the utter and criminal failure of politics to manage conflict by peaceful means. Mm-hmm. And then once you get into that space, then what can you do? You can look at the fact that the laws of armed conflict, which are justifying all this carnage in the Middle East and how they use it and trying to minimize collateral damage and whatever, and they're supposed to be a last resort. But when you don't have any other good resorts, you wind up defaulting to military intervention. And that has been the reflex of even Canadian policy or whatever, that force is a component of foreign policy. So unless you're willing to create a body of international codification of knowledge that demands or articulates precursors of peace operations as a strict precursor to the use of the laws of armed conflict. So you've got to have the other resources in place. And they're very, very easy. There is a UN resolution being worked on with various UN ambassadors to try to create a counterbalance to military departments, for example. That nation states could create either departments of peace or infrastructures of peace or something that are going to provide these alternatives to the use of military force. And if you look at the laws of armed conflict, which are really quite clear, it's just cause at the top, where you all of a sudden invoke the death penalty and rattles it all the way down to what weapons you use and proportionality and everything. And at the very end, it says, try and protect the civilians. Well, this has to be turned on its head.
Exactly. All right.
You have to look at conflict and say, number one, stop the violence, care for the victims, do the negotiations or whatever, and then rattle your way down to justice and peace and reconciliation and just cause. So if you can...
Okay, let's start right now with Yemen and the people of Yemen who are the ones doing the worst suffering, I presume. Now, maybe they're inflicting equivalent harm on some other people that I'm not aware of, but my impression is that the Yemeni people are the ones undergoing the greatest suffering.
That's correct.
What can be done now in the midst of this carnage to alleviate their suffering? Is there any group of people that we could more or less support that actually can deliver aid of the kind that they need now?
Well, there is. And as a matter of fact, if you take the construct that I just talked about, number one is you stop the violence. In other words, the proxies.
Okay, suppose we can't stop the violence. Suppose these countries are going to keep going, fighting no matter what. Can you get in there and help the people right now?
It's very hard.
Well, it's very, very hard. You've got to change, the whole notion of what a peace operation is. In other words, you got to just stop sending the weapons in to start. And then the humanitarian aid, of which the United Nations is well qualified to do, have to find some way in there. And then there, is some role for the military forces to protect the humanitarian aid, to go in there from an impartiality position, and deliver the cholera support and all of the things that are happening, the trauma.
All right, what military units right now exist that could do that starting day after tomorrow?
Well, this was one of the problems. You want to take Canada, for example. Justin Trudeau, when he got elected, saying there's going to be a pivot to peace operations. We're going to be international peace and stability. And he stopped bombing that he was doing in Iraq, I believe, against ISIS. So he converted something. He went, of course, to this operations impact thing, which is not helpful. He could have gone in another direction. One thing, Operation Impact in Iraq or wherever, or Afghanistan, deals with training You don't have to train anybody in the Middle East to kill other people. I mean, what you have to do is to be able to provide safe havens and humanitarian aid and protect diplomatic missions and get at it from that perspective, rather than the conflict perspective. Mm-hmm. And if the world, the global community got together and said to the various proxies that are giving all sorts of arms to whatever, Saudi Arabia or Iran and these countries to stop, I can guarantee you that those F-15s and those F-16s that they're using to bomb Yemen would not be flying in 2 or 3 weeks if you turn off the parts and the weapons. They would not. So you're going to be ratcheting down the capacity for all of this violence to some level where some UN intervention might be viable.
Okay, so your prescription would be to start by turning off the supplies for repair, gadgets that need to be done to keep these weapons functional. Is that
That's correct.
and that's
Because there's one of the big laws of armed conflict from the military point of view. Amateurs talk about tactics, professionals talk about logistics. Logistics is the blood of continuing conflict. And if you can get at that one, that's the big one.
okay. Who's trying to do that? And how can we help promote that angle of, I'm just trying to think, what can we do? How can we do something? And if indeed we could get to somebody and say, no more screwdrivers to go to Saudi Arabia or Iran or to the Houthis, no more whatever,
Then
no
you
more.
bring in United Nations forces in an impartial mission mandate, and you start to do things. It's not going
How do we make that happen?
It's not going to be easy. Well, I think we can start by somebody calling Justin Trudeau and Bob Rae as our United Nations ambassador and talking about, a UN resolution with regards to infrastructures of peace. What you have to do is you don't win wars by killing people. You win wars eventually by settlements and peace infrastructures, whatever it is you're going to build. And these things are well known and they're well out there. They just don't have the political and global will, to get at them. And you've got to start somewhere. So maybe this resolution starts somewhere. Maybe this attention to some sort of codification of peace operations that's serious is another place to start. And that's at the political level. Then you have to start working at the ground level. You have to work both ends at against the middle here. And that's where the humanitarian aids and the Global Affairs Canada funding of various projects to get in there and do that kind of thing. I mean, when you said, is there a unit that go in and do this? Well, after Justin Trudeau did his peace and stabilization thing, you looked at the Army. The Army has 12 brigades. Why isn't one of those brigades totally trained, equipped, and everything to do peace operations, safe havens, constabulary things, rather than a taking sides thing? I mean, that would have been a serious contribution. Well, we decided to go to Mali. What did we do in Mali? We ran medevacs and maybe 1,000 or 2 passenger taxi things with helicopters. I mean, that's not peacemaking.
Oh, I agree with you. And I agree that the peace is very important. And then Madame also mentioned that, okay, and given the situation right now that the war is still going on and they're still bombing each other, there are almost 3.5 million of 30 million population of almost 10% of population in Yemen are displaced now.
That's correct.
10%, that's a lot. More than 250,000 of people have been died. A lot of that by collusion, bombing, and Saudi Arabia's and all these countries that I mentioned before. The question is basically, there is not enough mind and money for peace, that there is mind and money for war and weaponry sales and all that economics that comes out of that. Okay. Now, when we really have to do that, United Nations is not capable of doing this. I mean, you can pass all resolution, you can talk about all day, but this is only an office work. This is not really on the ground that you can send your background and everything else can help. Now we have to go back and say, listen, look at rather than looking at the macro analysis, look at the micro analysis of this conflict. And I said that if Iranian and Saudi Arabia can somehow at that level come and sit down, them, and come to some senses that, listen, it's not going to help anybody. Come on and have some peace between these countries, these 2 important countries. Maybe through that channels, then there is some relaxation of weaponaries and reaction, and there's less suffering. So I think that the politics of peace is a politics of those countries involved in it. And I don't think United Nations, your good heart, all of your offices, all of your people, all of that put together here, you may be actually putting yourself worse in danger than you put in. No, peacekeeping is not an a safe things either. You don't think that is. We look at the history we have in Balkan, we have in other places. People die even at a peace mission. So we've seen that. I think that the solution is that if really, I hope Biden's administration, I hope they can really change this American one-sided look at the conflicts in the Middle East. Obviously, there are other places like Israelis are big players there too. They're significant in terms. And nowadays, the problem that you can see more, I can sense more problem in Middle East than what it is today. And especially the problem between Israelis and Iran right now, they are doing. You see that just a few days ago, they sabotaged an Iranian nuclear site in Natanz. And Iranian and there's another ship in Israelis was destroyed by so-called, I don't know. American and European have to really get into together and not put more encourage more Chinese to get into that, because if Chinese get into that get even worse, because they got the funds, they have the money, and they can do that. So we have to really, peace is a great thing to achieve, but it is very, very long road ahead of us to do that. I think that really it's easy to say, it's very hard to do, especially with all that hatred that has been believed. When you say that almost 250,000, half of them civilian and children have been died, they have parents, they have fathers, they have uncles, you think that they're going to let it go? And remember that Houthi now in Yemen, they came to in a military conflict because of the corruption, the central government of Sunnis in Sana'a, which is the capital of Yemen. And it went on and on and on. So I think that Iran and Saudi Arabia and other smaller countries, I don't want to mention which one, Qatar and Turkey also, Qatar and Turkey also the big player there too, especially Turkey. Turkey is involved in Syria. You know that how much they are involved in Syria. They're also involved in Yemen too, because they support Qatar and Qatar supports Saudi Arabia and Saudi Arabia and all of that.
You're absolutely right, Akbar. I agree. What I'm trying to say is that it has to be worked at all levels. You have to work at the geopolitical level. And sometimes when you go into a country in a peace situation, if you can't solve it politically, you can always make gains locally. I mean, these people have to live together. I mean, there are some stories and examples, for example, even in the Israel-Palestine situations where there are mixed communities that, by virtue of expediency, have to live together. They have a shared existence there. And you're right. This is multi-dimensional. It starts at global. It goes to the big powers. It goes to the politics and the government, and all the way down to the local. But the peace architecture that you want to envisage has to include all of that. It has to include peace practices for every single citizen, maybe practitioners that do education in communities and professionals, and right up to the government diplomacy levels.
I wish I could say we are ending with a very optimistic perspective, and I can't say that. I do think that more and more I come out of these conversations feeling that unless we get an upsurge of public opinion with a bit of vision about how we want to urge our governments to intervene and act to bring about a peaceful solution, that's where at least I need to start, and you and I, as citizens, need to start on talking to other people about what is possible. And it's very discouraging if we just look at the reality. But if we look at some of the things that Paul has suggested as potential solutions, maybe we get a few clues there. And I want to encourage everybody to do just what we've been envisioning. Talk to each other about how we need to change our perspective from war fighting into supporting peace on the ground. So
I hope so.
Thank you so much, both of you. Good wishes.
Yeah.
And good wishes to Yemen and to the people of their neighbors. Okay.
All the best. Thank you, Madam.
Sure.
Thank you.